Hey everybody, welcome back to Post Tennis Draft. I've got a great episode lined up today that I've been excited about for I think 2 months now. I've got a new friend, Ian Peatey. He is a trainer. I'll let him more introduce who he is, but a trainer in a concept I've heard of called nonviolent communication. And I'm really compelled by all this. Got to meet Ian through another Post Status member that has been to his training. When I reached out and said, does anybody know anybody that does training with nonviolent communication? There's a book by it. We'll talk more about that. But I think this is such a critical conversation to have. And I'm really excited. It's about emotions, expression of those emotions, and how I'm learning myself here, as I told you, Ian, earlier. But I'm really excited to share all, nonviolent communication, the thoughts we've talked about, part of this great concept that has really intrigued me, and I want to practice it. So, welcome to Post Status Draft. Thank you for being here, Ian. Could you share a little bit about it yourself?
Yeah, first of all, Corey, thanks for inviting me. I'm delighted to have this conversation. I really enjoyed our previous conversation. Um, yeah, about me. What's important? I turned 60 last year, and that's kind of turned my kind of thinking about myself upside down a little bit. It's been a big transition for me. And I'm kind of looking at my life in three parts now. So the first 30 years, the second 30 to 60, and now I'm just entering this final phase about how can I best kind of contribute with everything that I've learned over the years, all the experiences I've had. Um, and I think one of the major things that was a feature of my middle period was about 22, 23 years ago. I came across this approach called nonviolent communication. And at the time, I was working in business. I was a business trainer, business consultant. So I was very much in the business world. So working with big corporations, working as a coach, as a trainer in HR. Previous to that, I was in finance. So I was very much in this kind of materialistic, suit and tie. In those days, everyone wore a suit and tie. Um, I think things have changed quite a lot since then. I think you guys have made a big impact on that, kind of bringing a more casual approach and in like software and the whole kind of IT stuff, which was completely alien to me when I was at work, because I remember when the first pocket calculator was invented and was kind of the way that we did stuff. So I was very much in that world. And this approach, nonviolent communication, my first reaction was, I don't need nonviolent communication. I'm nonviolent. I was brought up to be, I'm British. You can probably tell from my accent. And I've lived in Eastern Europe for the last 30 years. So I've kind of made my home in this part of the world. Um, yeah, I had no concept that this could apply to me. But after 2 hours, it kind of changed my paradigm of the world. I started to see things in a very different way, see myself in a very different way. And since then, I've been looking to how can I incorporate this in my business training, and how can I um, support people in all walks of life that I would never have thought of reaching before. So I've been to Ukraine, for example, supporting the people in Kiev who have been working with those who are displaced, the internal refugees who are fleeing the front line of the war. Amazing work that I never would have dreamed of getting involved with when I was, working in business in the financial sector. And I see the power of helping people. You talked about emotions. It's more than that, but really connect with themselves and kind of support each other. I've got a colleague who's working on the front line in Ukraine. He's working with soldiers who are, facing bullets and rockets every day, equipping them with skills to give emotional support to each other.
Hmm.
So, mainly these are young kids and they're freaking out, obviously.
Yeah.
And he's equipping them with kind of the emotional awareness and the skills to be able to, um, provide some emotional support, which I think, is wonderful. And that's kind of one application. So that's kind of work that I get involved in with a little bit as well. Mainly my work is based here in Romania, which is where I live, building community here. So building a community of people who are invested in this approach. We've now got 11 trainers. I'm also working with new trainers, supporting them through getting ready to be able to run their training. And training is just one way that we're working with this. I'm also doing a lot of individual work, one-to-one counseling, coaching. I work a lot with couples and sometimes with business. Not as much as I'd like, though. It's one of those areas that's a bit difficult to get into with something called nonviolent communication. Yeah, and
we're gonna get to that part here
yeah,
pretty soon. But
yeah,
thank
yeah.
you for that. That's incredible work you're doing. Thank you for doing that. I know those soldiers and people affected will really feel that impact. That's incredible work. Um, so what really is nonviolent communication?
Well, I think the first thing to say is to kind of acknowledge let's say, the author of the method, which was an American psychologist, therapist called Marshall Rosenberg. He passed away a few years ago. I did have the pleasure and the honor of working with him a few times while he was still active. Um, and he was a student of Carl Rogers, who developed the humanistic approach to therapy. So any one of your listeners who's done therapy has almost certainly been impacted by Carl Rogers' work, which
Mhm.
was this power of really being present with another human beings, listening, talking and listening approaches to therapy. And it's kind of branched off in many ways. Anyway, what Marshall was interested in was how he framed it was, he grew up in Detroit during quite a period of social upheaval, and he was Jewish, and he was bullied quite badly because of that. He wasn't a practicing Jew, so it was kind of a bit puzzling for him. How come people were kind of kicking him just because of his name? What is it in the human condition that allows some people to treat other people in that way? And conversely, what is it that gives some people the quality where even when they're faced with war, for example, or civil unrest, they can still retain their compassion and their care, and they can treat people well? What's the difference? So he was looking for to discover the answer to that question. And what he hit on was the role of language and the way in which we think, how language in our thought processes and in our communication kind of differentiates those. So he looked at a number of things, and he's brought in a number of different um, spiritual traditions, therapeutic approaches, and really simplified it into something that's what is MVC at one level. It's a set of tools. It's a set of frameworks that are easy to understand. They're easy to apply, easy to learn. Sometimes they're easy to apply. I just want to put a caveat there, because many of us have been conditioned rather in the more violent way of thinking, kind of labeling, judging. Some people are good and bad, and bad people deserve to be punished. For example, as just one small example of some of the thinking patterns that he recognized lead to either verbal violence of some kind, or abuse, or physical violence. So at one level, it's this kind of a set of skills, and he developed he called it 4 steps. And I don't like that, because it's become very popular to have, 10 steps to happiness, or 5 steps to riches. And this is like 4 steps to effective communication. But actually, um, that's not really it. There's another level, there's another 2 levels to it. And the second level is, what's the core skills of communication as being a key aspect of being human? Is how do we communicate with each other? How do we communicate with ourselves? And he's kind of synthesized it into basically two skills, which we all know. One is how we express ourselves, and the other is how we listen to somebody else. And kind of laying on top of that, bringing in the quality of honesty when I'm speaking and empathy when I'm listening. So that's the second level. And then there's a third level, which you could call it a philosophy or an approach or an awareness or a consciousness. And how I like to think about that is kind of a recognition, it's kind of embedded in the whole approach that, you and I, even though we're in different continents, we are both similar and we're different. So we're both human beings. We both have a number of, physical features that are identical, some of which are similar, and we have what Marshall called our core human needs. So those things that motivate us, our values, the things that are really important to us. And we can identify some that are universal, and those link us together, and we're different. So, we also look, although we're the same, we look different. You've got a beard, I don't. I'm bald. You've probably got a reasonably full head of hair, although you're kind of hiding
R-
that with your
Reasonably.
reasonably full head of hair. But we have different preferences. We have different
Hmm.
experiences. We have different our characters are very different. Our ways of thinking are different. So we're kind of navigating both the differences and the similarities. And it's an awareness of this kind of core or shared humanity that we share with 7 billion or however many people are on the planet. Go anywhere to any place on the planet and you meet a human being, we can ask ourselves what's different and what's the same. And what this approach is looking at is kind of navigating the differences and focusing in on what's core to our humanity. And it's like that then leads us to recognize that we're sharing this planet together. We're interconnected. So just this conversation that we're having, neither of us have any idea what impact this will have. So it may be somebody will be listening to this and it will maybe shift something small. Other people will be listening to it and saying, okay, no, I'm not interested. Maybe they'll come back to it, maybe not. But we can't have any knowledge about the impact. But there is an impact. We are connected. We do have reach. And so it's almost like taking responsibility for whatever I do has an impact on countless numbers of people, most of which I will never know about. It's this interconnectedness that we're trying to get to with this approach. So process, framework, skills, and this awareness of our kind of shared humanity. That's what MVC is.
I love that. Thank you for unpacking that more. I've been working through the book, but that's really a great uh, expansion of what it is. I don't know if I told you, but I've been in Entrepreneurs Organization Forum for 11, 12 years now. And every month when we meet, we have a reflection sheet that comes out. And I started noticing a couple of years ago, there was a feelings inventory.
Yeah.
I said, where'd they get this? And there's a little logo that says nonviolent communication. Now, it probably took me a year to go, I should maybe Google what this is. And it was interesting. And then when I led with emotions there, it was that when you talked about connecting to the self and then practicing the empathy and listening with others and honesty too, I go, those are things I want personally for myself and then also to share with our community. So that's just a great way to unpack that. And it's a natural human thing that I think just grounds me back into, you know, all these people that we love and we see and we know, and then the broader planet perspective and how we can just. I love talking about things like this because it's to me it's really true impact. If I know how to connect with the self, express my emotions honestly with empathy and listening skills, then that's going to affect my kids, my wife, my family. Um, and that's far reaching. So that was compelling. And when we talked, I was even more compelled to go, okay, we gotta start sharing some of this. So thank you for that. So that's the what and some of the why. When we dig in to the practical side of this, what does it mean to practice nonviolent communication? And maybe this is more to the framework that I narrowed in
Yeah,
on the book and go, okay,
yeah,
I see
yeah,
these, they're clear to me.
yeah, yeah,
Now, how I
yeah.
implement? Could you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, and you've mentioned one of the elements here, which is emotions, is feelings, which is, I mentioned these four steps. Um, I prefer to think of them as kind of four focus areas or four things to remember, to take into account when I'm communicating, when I'm listening, when I'm interacting with myself, when I'm interacting with other people. And emotions is one of them. I think it was in the 80s. I remember emotional intelligence. There was a book
Mhm.
written, and it suddenly became really popular. And the thesis there that was that he demonstrated with this book and then the subsequent work was that people who were emotionally intelligent were more successful than those who weren't. So part of nonviolent communication is becoming more emotionally literate. So can I connect with my emotions? Do I know what I'm feeling? And can I communicate that in a way that's going to connect me with other people? Because I was brought up to suppress my emotions, and I'm a parent. I've got three kids, so I know how tempting it is when a young child is acting out. They haven't yet learned how to control and use their emotions effectively. It's very easy to use manipulation tactics to get them to calm down. I kind of distract them, or I shame them, humiliate them. There are a number of tactics. Being a male growing up as a boy, boys don't cry, don't be such a baby. These were kind of messages that I heard over and over again. So I kind of learned, couldn't discern anything else, that emotions were somehow, to be hidden. There's to be ignored. Not, it was more important, rationality was more important in my whole education, in my family, particularly with my father, who's a very rational, logical, intelligent guy. Um, I once heard him say that if you can't touch it and feel it, then it's not worth thinking about,
Mm.
which kind of somehow summarized. So if you can't touch and feel an emotion, for example, then in his view, it's not worth thinking about. And what I realized, so part of the practice of MVC is to get more in contact with my emotional world, to see it as valuable, as pointing to it's the way that I often describe it, it's like the dashboard on if you have a dashboard, a systems dashboard, it's giving you various indicators. And it maybe some of those are giving you warning signs that you've overextended something or you've under-resourced something. It's like a dashboard. And if I can see my emotions as a dashboard, it's constantly giving me information about what's going on in my inner world. So learning how to harness and be comfortable with my emotions, my feelings, and the feelings and emotions of others is a core step of learning how to practice MVC. And that also involves probably unlearning some of the stuff that I was kind of conditioned with as a child. I think we can all recognize that some of our communication and thinking patterns are not particularly helpful, yet we still do them.
Mhm.
I've learned that when I get angry with my 14-year-old and I raise my voice, it doesn't end well. It never
Mhm.
ends well, and it never will end well because she's at an age where she can shout back and she's independent enough to be able to, make her own choices. So, but that's still a pattern that I, developed from my childhood, my upbringing. So a large part of learning and changing a style of communication is unlearning all
Mm.
these, programming that I've received throughout my life. Um, and that emotional one is one. Another important one, just to mention another one of the four, is
Mhm.
our thinking patterns. We grow up learning to judge and evaluate what's going on around us, which can be very helpful because it helps us, classify things. Is this safe? Is this enjoyable? Is this not enjoyable? Should I avoid it? Should I move towards it? Um, but the risk is in human connection. When I start to judge and label people, then it creates disconnection. I cannot get the quality of relationship with the people around me if I'm judging them. I mean,
Mhm.
none of us like to hear judgments about us. Why is that? Well, because it's an invasion of my boundaries. If you tell me, Ian, you're what you're saying is really boring, and it's nothing new. Everybody, what are you doing here? Then you're telling me something about myself, which is very personal. Yeah. And if you rephrase that and talk about yourself rather than about me, so rather than saying, Ian, what you're boring,
Mhm.
you say, well, Ian, I'm listening to you and I'm having a hard time paying attention, and I would really like to pay attention. Could you give some more examples from, real life? That would help me stay engaged with what you're saying. Then that's different. That's not an invasion of the boundary. That's you telling me something about your reality. That's useful feedback for me. I still might not like it, but it's much more likely to land with me, and I can do something with it when you talk about yourself and about how you're feeling, what your needs are, and you make a clear request. What would you like to be different? And this is kind of the essence of MVC, is to be able to do that smoothly and easily. And as I said, it requires a lot of practice. It requires a lot of unlearning for most of us. Some people were fortunate and they were raised in this way, to think and communicate in this way, or something similar. Yeah.
That's great. Yeah, right there when you're saying thinking patterns and judging is um and the point when you got to, instead of like where we're talking, you feel like you're pointing the finger at somebody
Yeah,
else,
exactly.
you're
Yeah.
starting from within.
Yeah.
And I can immediately see how that just shifts the emotional frequency, or I don't know,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
intensity, I guess, to be this is really about me in reaction to what we're talking about, but
Exactly. Yeah.
it starts from needs based first.
Yeah. What's really interesting, Cory? Even though there's an ocean between us, and even though we're on screens, you point the finger at me, and there's this small kind of, I'm tense. It's like, what's coming
Yeah.
at me? And what we're doing with nonviolent communication is, identifying that finger pointing when we're doing it with words
Mm.
and changing it into something that's, more likely to connect us. It's not a guarantee. There's no guarantees with this. Just increases the chances.
Absolutely. And I'll take that every day.
Yeah,
So the emotional literate
yeah,
part and then the thinking patterns really resonate with me.
yeah,
So when I told you I looked at the feelings inventory, they call it, at least on the sheet I have, and I think it might be a little dated, but I was like, gosh, there's a lot of emotions here.
yeah,
And our exercise is to go through our reflections worksheet, what's happened in the last 30 days, and then to draw out from that sheet as a base. Sometimes I think this is where I just confess seeking to become more emotionally literate of my own emotions. Um, but when I look at that, they'll say, put three feelings in about the event that you're talking about, that you're going to eventually share with our forum group. And I always struggle with that. I was like, gosh, you look through that form sheet. I wish I had one right here. I know I probably do laying around here because I just did this. And I go, sometimes I get overwhelmed. I'm like, I don't know. So I just went with the top level ones:
yeah,
angry, sad, the big ones. And I've started there. And okay, from my emotional literacy, I'm just going to start there on the bigger categories that resonate. And then over time, I want to be more nuanced and understand my own emotions. I don't know if you ever watched the Pixar movie Inside Out.
Inside Out. Yes,
I
love that
love
movie.
that.
Yeah, me
It
too.
was
Yeah, me too.
transformational for
Yeah,
me, because those little, if you haven't seen it, for those listening, when the balls, so essentially it's an inside look of a person, a kid actually, but You got anger, sadness. I can't remember the other ones. Disgust, I
Disgust,
think is one of
disgust
them.
and joy.
And
Disgust and
joy.
joy. Yeah.
And my thinking was you have one emotion rolls down the thing, and that's what happens. As the movie progresses, you see the balls are not one color; they are mixtures of things. And probably in the last year or so, just really realizing, okay, I can have two seemingly opposite emotions at the same time,
Yeah.
and I think that's really compelling.
Yeah. Yeah. And we can take two apparently competing positions with somebody else. So, for example, my beloved, my wife, sometimes, I'm connecting with, I love you, and I really don't like what you're doing right now.
Right.
Yeah, it's like, and this is happening all the time. It's like and sometimes it seems like these are in conflict, but it's, if we can take this position where we can hold everything that we're experiencing, and then we can discern what do I want to respond to. So, with an example of my wife, if she's doing something that I'm not enjoying, and yet I look at her and I'm, touched with the beauty, and my heart is opening. Where do I put my energy? Do I focus on what she's doing and I don't enjoy it? I might choose to do that, and I can do it, but I'm doing it from this position of, compassion and care and love. And I know most of the people, listening are working, are drawn here from kind of organizational context, but I think the same is true for everybody we're interacting with. I can love you and hate you at the same time, almost. It's like this
Mhm.
different colors of these balls in that movie.
And then I think when it gets to one is understanding what's going in with us, and then when you talked about martial language, that's definitely been the struggle for me. Is one just understanding what's going on in here, and then expressing it, and
Yeah.
that's where I have seen the framework we've talked about with nonviolent communication be really intriguing to me, of how now to communicate, understand those, and then communicate them
Yeah.
in a way that I just think of not feeling attacked or defensive in the language, and that part is really, first part is understanding the emotion. The second part for me is how to express it in a way that doesn't just inflame the situation and is nonviolent.
And actually, that is a risk when we first start making changes, particularly with people who know us and we have, established communication patterns already. So I remember when I first was practicing with nonviolent communication with my sister. She turned at me with this look of disgust and said, "Don't try and psychoanalyze me." And it was like, just cutting I was doing my best, but it was a change. It was a complete change. It was a way of, talking about my feelings with her, or listening to her in a way where I was trying to understand what she was feeling, was something that was completely alien to our established pattern of communication. And of course, there's a reaction. I understand it. I get it. So there is, you asked earlier about how to practice MVC and kind of how to learn it. It does require patience. It does require some carefulness in kind of choosing the moments, choosing
Mm.
the people. Until I get more familiar with it, I get more comfortable with, how to change. And Marshall kind of gave this, 4 steps. And I take that more as a mental model, not as a way to communicate. Because if you follow the same pattern over and over again, it's just, you start to sound like a robot. And it's inauthentic, will disturb the connection, and it's not going to be effective. So what I want to do is hold, what Marshall offered as these 4 steps, which is observation, feelings, needs, and request. So how am I experiencing the world? Am I judging it, or what am I noticing? What am I responding to? That's the observation. How am I feeling in response to it? And what need is that pointing to? What value, what's important to me in this situation? And the request is, what do I want to happen? If I follow that 4 steps over and over again, then I'm not going to get anywhere. But what I want to do is to kind of internalize that, so it's more fluid, it's more natural. It's, I am able to make clear requests. I'm asking for what I want in a way that is more inviting. I can learn that. I can learn to express my feelings in a clearer way, and hold them as mine. It's my, they're my feelings. So you're not making me feel any particular way. You might be involved in it, but it's my responsibility.
Hmm.
It's these kinds of things that I can learn as I go deeper, as I practice more. So there's an approach to learning called the practice group. And often, when a group of people have kind of come together after reading Marshall's book, they say, really excited about this, just want to practice with it. So there's kind of these spontaneous, and there are some resources available. So spontaneous groups coming together just to practice in a safe environment. There's no stakes. If you and I and a few friends get together, say, okay, once a week, let's just get together and practice some difficult scenarios, rehearse, then it's a safe space. That gradually builds the confidence and the fluency of changing how we're communicating, because this supersedes language, in the sense of we're speaking English. I'm living in Romania, which is obviously a different language. I lived in Poland, different language. This kind of sits above all of that. But when I'm learning a new language, I try to learn Polish, and I do speak it a little bit, but it's really awkward. And I don't always, or very rarely, communicate exactly what I want to communicate in the way that somebody else can respond to it. So it's really painful. And it's somehow the same with this. It can feel a bit painful as we're trying to change a whole paradigm of communication.
What are the tips and thoughts that you have as someone goes, I see this, I see the value, I want to start practicing uh, MVC?
Um, well, I think that the first thing is to get a good foundation of the basic ideas, and you can do that. There's plenty of videos of Marshall talking about it. There's a very nice kind of short video of Marshall talking about the basic ideas, and there's also videos on YouTube freely available of some of his training. So that might be one way. There's his book. That would be another way, just to get kind of a foundation of what is this all about? Where's this going? I shouldn't say this, but I don't particularly like Marshall's book. Many people do, so this is just me, and it's more about what suits you in terms of absorbing new ideas. Another way is to find some local practitioners, some local trainers who are offering. Most trainers will offer regular introduction, which might be a few hours, it might be half a day, something like that, to really get the basics. And from there you can decide, is that for me? Is this something that I'm drawn to, learn more about? Is this something that's worthwhile investing more of my time and energy in changing? It makes it a lot easier if I'm doing it with somebody. So I was fortunate when I first came across MVC, we came across it with my wife. So we were studying it together. And we're both trainers in nonviolent communication. So it's kind of brought us together, kept us together through some difficult moments as well. So that would be my recommendation of a first step. Find some training videos of Marshall. The book can be useful maybe once you've kind of heard the basics. And then there's about 700 active trainers around the world, across the world. And most of them are offering open trainings. Many of them are also offering what I call closed trainings, so by invitation into an organization. So there's various ways to access it, either open, which tends to be more people working in education, working on themselves, personal development. Education and parenting is very popular with MVC because it really gives a different way of raising kids and working with kids, which I know is important to many people, myself included. Yeah, so find the context that works. I'm about to leave for a 2-week training next week in Poland, which is an intense immersion in nonviolent communication. So it's 9 days, living it, living together, learning different workshops, different trainers. But that would be kind of a next step if it's
Mhm.
something that you really want to work with.
Yeah, and you mentioned the practice groups. I know when we talked
Yeah,
previously and
yeah,
today, and that seems, as I've looked at it, read parts of the book, I go, okay, how do I even begin to start practicing this with my children, with my wife?
yeah.
Starting there first and foremost, like you said, parents and kids. Um, so that's good. And then, there's resources online, like you said, the book, and then trainers and practice group for sure.
Yeah, and to find a practice group, I would recommend the most effective way to do that would be to find, who's training in your area. Chances are there is a trainer who's, living, if you're, particularly if you're in one of the major cities around the world, there's likely to be at least one trainer active, and they can point you in the direction. They will know where to go to find a practice group. Maybe they're running practice groups themselves or starting them. Um, there's also a workbook that's available through the Center for Nonviolent Communication, which is kind of a week by week study guide with exercises and kind of taking the principles in Marshall's book for use with practice groups or study groups. So that's another way, slightly different variation of a group. But it,
Um,
but it, but it does require kind of reaching out and searching for it. There isn't kind of a central, repository of all the activities that are going on worldwide. It's because the organization is more organic. It's not a top-down organization. It's very much a grassroots organization with some activities taken care of in the Center for Nonviolent Communication, which is based in the States.
what are some of the obstacles and things you've seen people get tripped on when they're like, "Hey, I want to start practicing it." What are the common things you hear and see as people start to like really try to implement this, practice it in their lives?
Well, I've mentioned already these kind of patterns of thinking and communication patterns, and I people kind of we have blind spots, and we don't necessarily see that we are communicating in a particular way or that there's something that could change. So, that can be kind of a stumbling block, is like just not being aware. And that does require a certain introspection or a willingness to hear feedback from others. So there's some stumbling blocks just in terms of recognizing the ways in which I'm creating disconnection with other people. I'm just unaware of it. So that would be one thing. Um, the second thing I think is it's easy to get discouraged because it does take practice. It does take developing a certain fluency before you really start to notice the benefits. So doing it in a safe place like a practice group or a training course is one way. Enlisting people that you're close to, that you want to do this together, is also a safe environment to do it. So you've got some support system around you, because it can be quite lonely. I know plenty of people, particularly in the business world, who come on a course and they say, wow, this is great. I'm going to go back to my organization and I'm going to transform my organization. So, because we're all going to communicate this way. I had one who was a chief executive of a branch of one of the Fujitsu, I think it was at the time, and he was like super excited. So he went up and he bought Marshall's book for all his employees, and he went back to the office and said, "Look, you have to read this," and nothing. There was like complete resistance to it because the boss was telling them that they had to do something that they didn't want to do. Um, so kind of the enthusiasm can get to be a bit of a resistance as well, because I became a bit of in I'm not proud of it, but I became something of a nonviolent communication policeman when I was learning it. So, for example, making a differentiation between a feeling and a thought is one thing that we want to develop some skills around, because we often communicate our thoughts as though they're feelings. So I feel that you're not listening to me might be a common way of saying, I'm thinking that you're not listening to me. It's not a feeling. So I became a bit of obnoxious by pointing out to people that, well, no, that's not a feeling. And that was kind of coming from enthusiasm, wanting to make a change, but kind of pushing it, overdoing it. So that's another kind of risk. There are plenty of others, but those are the ones
Yeah.
that kind of immediately come to mind.
Well, I know you mentioned in the start, we've talked about this a couple of times, that there's areas of the world that really have embraced it. But one of the segments of the world that hasn't is business. And I think I want to practice it in my family, but I want it to flow out into my work. Um, and
Yeah.
eh, especially I think it's even more just yeah, exacerbated in the economic climate. Um, but we see it in our industry too, is such the big focus on profits that kind of comes down and it's just cog in the wheel. We were talking in the pre-show, like command and control type structure.
Mm.
And what do you see opportunities for business to embrace nonviolent communication?
I mean, I think the first thing I want to say is that I love profit. I mean, I love having money. It's so useful. I
Hmm.
mean, it's important. I really can't imagine, thriving in this world that we've created without access to money. So, I kind of get it. I mean, I understand this, at the systemic level, at the global level, this drive for profit to earn money. And also it brings choice, it brings power, it brings freedom, it brings so many things. But we also see the impact of when that's our only focus, the kind of geopolitical systems that we get into with, the war machines, the destruction of the environment. There's, everywhere you look, it seems that is the impact of a drive for profit without considering the consequences on the bigger mass of humanity. So I'm absolutely not anti-profit in any way, but I do want to bring back this interconnectedness, this care for humanity. And there's various ways that manifests in business. You mentioned command and control. So how we use power, how we accumulate power and authority, and then how we use it. So I like this concept of power with. So I want to be in my power, and I want everyone to be fully in their power, to be at their best. And then we can do magic things, when we're all at our best. But if I'm using my power to put you down, to control you, to get you to behave in certain ways and not behave in other ways, then I'm using my power over you. And in corporations where you have any kind of management structure, then I do have power. I have some systemic power. I have some organizational power. If I'm kind of at manager, senior levels, I can fire you. I have influence over your, your evaluation, your pay. That's power. How do I use it? How can we flatten structures so that, we're all in this together and we can make decisions together? One of my most painful moments in working in business was I was made redundant from a job that I had many years ago. And my boss called, and I knew something was happening, and I was like really freaking out because there were all these conversations going. And I was quite senior in the organization. I was a senior manager, and there were all these kind of whispered conversations going on. And I knew something was happening, so I confronted my boss at the time. And I said, "Look, tell me, is my job safe?" And he looked me in the eye and he said, "Yes." And a week later, he called me in and said, "I think it would be a good idea if you left and started your own business." And he said, "Ian, it's not personal. We're restructuring. When it's not personal." I said, "Can I swear?" I said, "Fuck it. It is personal. I've put a lot of my time and energy into this. I want it to be personal." That for me was him using his power over me. And it really pissed me off, really deep. And it was very painful for me. And it could have been so much different. I would have liked to have been trusted to have a meaningful conversation. I understood business. I knew what the situation was. We could have had an adult to adult conversation and reached the same decision, but in a different way, in a way where I felt my voice was being heard and I was involved in constructing the solution to the problem, which was there wasn't enough money to continue to pay my salary and keep my position open. And I got that. I mean, I'm not stupid. I would like to be respected and trusted and treated as an adult. So that's just, one example of the ways in which power can be used and has impact, negative impact in this case. I want us to be able to have difficult conversations in the workplace. I want us to be able to have a conversation about performance, but in a human way, in a respectful way, in a way that's, really giving an opportunity to make a change, not just through some arbitrary evaluation system and tied with pay. Let's have serious adult to adult conversations. Now, not everybody is up for that. I get that. Not everybody is ready for that. So can we create a culture where we're getting people ready for this?
Mm.
And I
Yes.
believe, if we can have that culture of mutual respect, of honesty and integrity, and unfortunately, if I look at the political culture around the world, then honesty and integrity seems to have been rather degraded on the list of priorities for political, in the political world. And it's happening in Europe. I see it in the States. And that's somehow, I want to bring that back. I want to be in a culture where there's integrity, there's honesty, transparency, respect. And then we can, really do great stuff together, because
Mhm.
I'm willing to give more of myself when I've got that kind of culture. So that's where I want to be.
That's the other side. And I know we had discussed this previously, but if I feel if you treat people like humans, fellow humans with respect, and I think in just a little bit of care, you
Yeah,
will get more than the top down, do this, don't do that. And that's where this is intriguing again to the conversation, to have a
yeah,
human conversation. But
yeah.
uh,
And some people will say, yeah, but if you treat people kindly with care, they'll just abuse you. You need to be hard, you need to be tough. Sometimes, yes, you do. You know, you do need to be tough sometimes, but that doesn't mean that you need to be dishonest or without compassion. You can be both. It's not either or. Because in business, as as an entrepreneur, sometimes you need to make tough decisions because you're responsible for a bigger picture. And that might sometimes might mean, demoting people, shifting people out, firing people. Of course, we need to make, you as an entrepreneur need to make tough decisions, but that doesn't automatically mean that you can do it without care, without respect, without honesty and transparency. It can be both.
Absolutely. Well, Ian, thank you so much for today. What my takeaway too for me is, have how to have more honest conversations, truly honest, which are great. Getting to what we're feeling, being able to express that in a nonviolent way, and that honesty, when you said kind of in the beginning, honesty and empathy, it's that's freeing to me to think about that. Like being in a space where I can say what I am feeling and not, you know, potentially really inflame a situation, but get to the core and express who I am. I think that's really
Yeah.
awesome. And doing that throughout our lives, work and friendship and in the community, it's incredible. Well, thank you again, Ian, so much for doing this. I love the work you're doing in the world, and thank you for sharing these concepts and a new approach. I hope those that are listening will consider it. Look up Ian. We'll put your website, contact information too, in the show notes. But thank you again. I know it's late for you, but I appreciate your time.
Thank you very much, Cory. I enjoy the conversation. Yeah, I really feel a lot of passion talking about this stuff. It's really important to me, and I think it is to many, you know, I think it's important to everybody. It's just not everybody has realized it yet.
Agreed. All right. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.